The first radio signal from Earth reached the galactic hegemony on a Tuesday. At least it would have been Tuesday if anyone in the galaxy still counted days the way humans did. The message was simple. Just old television broadcasts bouncing through space, carrying the voices and images of a species the galaxy had never seen before. Dr. HFY, a crystalline being from the Zephyrian homeworld, studied the signals with growing alarm. These creatures called themselves humans, and they were dangerous. Not because they had great weapons or powerful ships. They were dangerous because they were unpredictable. The hegemony had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. 12 species worked together to keep peace among the stars. They had rules for everything. When a new species could join them, how wars should be fought, which planets could be settled. The system worked because everyone followed the same basic patterns of thought, but humans were different. HFY watched their entertainment programs and news broadcasts. These humans fought constantly, even among themselves. They created art that made no logical sense. They took terrible risks for no clear benefit. They loved and hated with equal intensity. They were chaos given form. The Council of Worlds met in emergency session. Representatives from all 12 species gathered in the great crystal chamber above Zephyr Prime. The debate lasted for months. The collective, a hive mind of insect-like beings, spoke first. These humans breed too quickly. They consume resources without regard for sustainability. They are a plague. The Aquatic Federation disagreed. All young species go through violent phases. Perhaps we can guide them. But HFY had studied humans longer than anyone. He stood before the council and presented his findings. Honored representatives, I have watched these humans for 50 of their years. They do not follow our patterns. They cannot be predicted or controlled. In their short history, they have gone from simple agriculture to splitting the atom. They learn too fast. They adapt too quickly. He played recordings of human wars, human art, human love stories. The council watched in growing horror. They fight not just for resources or territory, HFY continued. They fight for ideas. They die for concepts that exist only in their minds. They create weapons that could destroy their own world, then choose not to use them. They are capable of both infinite cruelty and infinite mercy. Such beings cannot be allowed to reach the stars. The vote was unanimous. The humans would be eliminated before they could spread their chaos to other worlds. The armada that approached Earth was the largest military force ever assembled. Ships from all 12 species, each one a masterpiece of technology refined over millennia. The humans detected them when they were still 3 days out, but it did not matter. Earth's weapons were primitive. Their ships were barely capable of leaving their own atmosphere. Admiral Thex 9, a mechanical being from the Synthesis Republic, commanded the fleet. He had fought in the border wars and the rebellion of the Outer Rim. He knew how to end threats quickly and cleanly. The attack began at dawn over the Pacific Ocean. Massive beams of energy fell from the sky like angry gods reaching down to Earth. New York vanished. In a flash of light, London became a crater of glass. Beijing simply ceased to exist. In the first hour, 2 billion humans died. Dr. Elena Vasquez was deep underground when the world ended above her. She worked at CERN, the great particle accelerator buried beneath the border of France and Switzerland. The facility's location saved her life. The alien weapons could not penetrate that deep into the Earth. Around her, alarms screamed. Computer screens showed impossible readings as cities disappeared from satellite feeds. Elena ran to the communications center, trying to contact anyone, anywhere. Most of the world had gone silent. The bombardment continued for 3 days. The aliens were systematic, almost surgical in their destruction. They hit military bases first, then government centers, then major population areas. They left the smaller towns and rural areas mostly untouched, as if they wanted some humans to survive as witnesses. Elena and the other survivors at CERN watched helplessly as humanity's greatest achievements turned to ash. The International Space Station went dark. The lunar colonies stopped responding. Earth's small fleet of interplanetary vessels was destroyed before they could even launch. On the 4th day, the bombardment stopped. Massive ships descended through Earth's atmosphere, settling over major continents like metal mountains. Smaller craft emerged from them, carrying troops to the surface. The aliens had come to finish the job. Elena made contact with other Survivors using quantum-encrypted channels that the aliens seemed unable to. Dr. James Park at the ruins of MIT, General Sarah Chen from a military bunker in Colorado, Professor Ahmad Hassan from a research station in Antarctica, scattered voices in the darkness all asking the same question: how had this happened? The answer came from an unexpected source. A damaged alien fighter had crashed near the entrance to CERN, and Elena's team managed to recover its communication logs before the pilot died. The files were encrypted, but human computers had one advantage the aliens had not expected. They could think in chaotic, unpredictable ways. Elena stared at the translated records in growing horror. The galaxy had watched Earth for decades. They had studied human behavior, human psychology, human potential, and they had been afraid. They didn't attack us because we were a threat, she whispered to her team. They attacked us because we might become one. The aliens had seen something in humanity that even humans themselves did not fully understand. The capacity for unlimited growth, the ability to adapt and evolve not just physically but mentally and socially, the dangerous gift of looking at any system and finding ways to improve it or break it entirely. Above ground, the occupation began. Alien troops herded surviving humans into camps. Scientists studied them like laboratory animals. Philosophers debated whether the species should be allowed to continue existing in small numbers or eliminated entirely. But deep underground, Elena Vasquez and her fellow survivors began to plan. They had lost their world, their civilization, their future, but they had gained something else: knowledge. They knew exactly what the galaxy feared about humanity, and they were going to prove those fears were justified. Elena looked at the recovered alien technology scattered across the laboratory tables. Energy weapons that defied human physics, communication devices that worked through dimensions humans had never imagined, computers that processed information in ways no human mind could follow. They made one mistake, she said to the small group of scientists and soldiers gathered around her. They assumed we couldn't learn from them. Dr. Park nodded grimly. They've never faced a species that could reverse engineer their technology while hiding in holes in the ground. General Chen checked her equipment lists. We have maybe 10,000 people scattered across 100 facilities. They have millions of troops and thousands of ships. Numbers don't matter, Elena replied, her eyes reflecting the cold light of alien displays. They fight according to rules. We don't have any rules left. The first human resistance cell formed that day in the depths of CERN, surrounded by the wreckage of human achievement and the promise of alien technology. They had lost everything that made them human. Now they would learn to become something the galaxy had never seen before. 5 years had passed since the stars fell on Earth. In those years, humanity had learned to live like ghosts. The aliens called themselves the Galactic Hegemony, and they had settled into their occupation of Earth with the casual efficiency of gardeners tending a greenhouse. They had built great towers in the ruins of major cities, from which they administered the surviving human population. Most humans lived in designated zones, fed basic nutrients, allowed to reproduce under careful supervision. The aliens believed they had won a complete victory. Their reports back to the Council of Worlds spoke of a broken species, no longer capable of significant resistance. A few thousand humans had escaped the roundups and lived in hiding, but they posed no real threat. The galaxy could sleep safely, knowing that the human problem had been solved. The aliens were wrong. Deep beneath the surface of Earth, in bunkers carved from solid rock and hidden cities built in abandoned mines, humanity was learning. Dr. Elena Vasquez had become something she never expected to be, a teacher of war. The underground facility beneath the Swiss Alps had grown since the invasion. What started as a handful of survivors in CERN's tunnels had become a network of laboratories, workshops, and training centers. Similar installations existed on every continent, connected by quantum communication systems that the aliens could not detect. Elena stood before a group of young humans, most of them born after the invasion. They had never seen the sun except through alien filters. They had never known a world where humans walked freely under open sky, but they had something their parents' generation lacked. They had grown up learning from the enemy. What is the first rule of alien warfare? Elena asked. A girl named Sarah raised her hand. She was 14 years old and could disassemble an alien energy weapon blindfolded. They fight according to patterns established over thousands of years. And the second rule? They cannot adapt quickly to new patterns, answered Marcus, a boy whose parents had died in the Beijing strike. Their technology is perfect, but their thinking is fixed. Elena nodded. These children understood things that had taken her years to learn. The aliens were not invincible. They were just very, very old. In another section of the facility, General Sarah Chen worked with her own students. But where Elena taught technology, Chen taught something the aliens had never encountered: human tactics. The aliens fight like chess players, Chen explained to her class of guerrilla fighters. They plan many moves ahead. They position their forces according to mathematical models. They seek decisive battles where superior technology can determine the outcome. She gestured to a holographic display showing alien patrol patterns. But humans don't play chess. We play poker, we bluff. We take impossible risks. We change the rules in the middle of the game. Chen's students were older, hardened survivors of the early resistance efforts. They had learned to strike at alien convoys and disappear into the wilderness. They had developed weapons that looked like scrap metal but could penetrate alien shields. Most importantly, they had learned to think in ways that confused and frustrated their enemies. The breakthrough came in the third year of the occupation. Dr. James Park, working in a hidden laboratory beneath the ruins of MIT, managed to reverse engineer an alien computer core. The technology was unlike anything humans had ever created. It processed information through quantum tunneling and dimensional folding. But Park discovered something remarkable. The alien computers were incredibly powerful, but they were also predictable. They solved problems by following logical pathways established by their creators millions of years ago. They could not improvise. They could not create. They could not think chaotically. Human computers, crude as they were, had one advantage. They had been designed by a chaotic species. They could process random inputs, make intuitive leaps, and arrive at solutions through paths that made no logical sense. Park created the first hybrid system, alien hardware running human software. The result was a computer that could think like a human but process information like an alien. For the first time since the invasion, humans had technology that could match their enemies. The success spread through the underground network. Hidden factories began producing hybrid weapons. Salvaged alien materials were combined with human creativity to create tools of war unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Elena's team developed smart ammunition that could adapt its explosive yield based on target composition. Chen's fighters created stealth suits that bent light in impossible ways. Park's computers designed ships that looked like flying junkyards but could outmaneuver anything in the alien fleet. But technology was only part of the equation. Humanity's real weapon was something the aliens could not understand or counter: desperation combined with hope. The aliens had destroyed human civilization, but they had also freed humanity from the constraints of civilized behavior. The survivors were no longer bound by laws, treaties, or moral conventions that prohibited certain types of warfare. They had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The first major operation took place in the fourth year. A hegemony supply convoy was traveling from the lunar mining stations to the command base in former New York. The convoy consisted of 3 heavy transport ships and a dozen escort fighters, following a route they had used safely for years. Chen's strike team hit them in the space between Earth and Moon, using modified mining charges to create an artificial asteroid field. When the convoy stopped to clear the debris, human fighters attacked from inside the asteroids themselves. The battle lasted only 18 minutes. The aliens lost 2 transport ships and half their escorts. More importantly, they lost something they had not lost in centuries: confidence. The human fighters had used tactics that made no sense according to galactic military doctrine. They had sacrificed their own ships to destroy larger targets. They had fought with a ferocity that seemed to border on madness. They had won through methods that no civilized species would consider acceptable. Admiral Thex 9, still commanding the occupation force, filed a report that reached the Council of Worlds within days. The humans were proving more difficult to pacify than expected. They requested additional troops and resources. But in the hidden cities beneath Earth's surface, humanity was celebrating their first real victory. They had proven that the aliens could be beaten. More importantly, they had captured intact alien technology, including a complete supply ship with its quantum communication array. Elena stood in the main laboratory, watching her teams study the captured equipment. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to smile. "Now we can hear them," she said to Chen. "We know what they're saying to each other. We know their patrol schedules, their supply routes, their troop movements." Chen nodded, but her expression remained grim. "One convoy doesn't mean we can win this war." "No," Elena agreed. "But it means we can make them pay for starting it." Around them, human engineers worked to decode alien technology, while human soldiers planned new strikes. Children who had never known freedom studied the weapons of their oppressors. Survivors who had lost everything found purpose in the promise of revenge. The aliens believed they had solved the human problem. They believed that a broken species could never threaten galactic order. They were about to learn that humanity's greatest strength had always been its ability to adapt, evolve, and become something entirely new when faced with extinction. In the depths of Earth, in the darkness between the stars, something was stirring, something that had once been human but was becoming something more, something that would make the galaxy remember why they had been afraid in the first place. 10 years after the invasion, humanity revealed itself to the galaxy once more. But this time, they were not sending radio signals or television broadcasts. They were sending warships. The first the hegemony knew of humanity's return to space was when their monitoring station on Europa went silent. The base commander had time to send only 3 words before the transmission cut off. "Ships approaching fast." Admiral Sarah Okafor commanded the lead vessel of what humans called the Ghost Fleet. Her ship, the Defiance, looked like it had been assembled from spare parts and scrap metal. In many ways it had been. But beneath its ugly exterior lay technology that no alien species had ever imagined. The Defiance dropped out of hyperspace just outside Europa's orbit, followed by 19 other ships of various sizes and configurations. They looked nothing like the sleek, elegant vessels of the hegemony. They looked dangerous. Admiral Thex-9 received the alert in his command center above the ruins of New York. For a moment, he could not process what his sensors were telling him. Human ships. In space, impossible. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "the vessels are broadcasting on all frequencies. They're sending a message." The message was simple, delivered in perfect galactic standard by a human voice that carried the weight of 10 years of suffering. "This is Admiral Sarah Okafor of the Terran Liberation Fleet. We are here to collect what you owe us. You took our world. We are here to take it back." The battle for Europa lasted 6 hours. By any logical measure, the humans should have lost. Their ships were smaller, their numbers fewer, their technology cobbled together from salvaged parts. The hegemony defenders fought with weapons that had conquered dozens of star systems over thousands of years. But logic had never been humanity's strongest suit. The Defiance led the attack with tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Instead of engaging at long range with energy weapons, Okafor brought her ships in close, using the chaos of melee combat to negate the aliens' technological advantages. Human ships deliberately rammed alien vessels, their pilots ejecting at the last second in escape pods that looked like missiles to confused alien sensors. The most devastating weapon in the human arsenal was not their guns or their shields. It was their unpredictability. The aliens had prepared for every logical assault pattern, every reasonable tactical choice. They had not prepared for humans who fought like cornered animals with nothing left to lose. When the hegemony flagship tried to withdraw to call for reinforcements, it found its path blocked by a human vessel that had been pretending to be destroyed. The ship detonated its entire power core in a spectacular explosion that took out 3 alien cruisers. The surviving defenders surrendered when human marines began boarding their ships. The aliens had never encountered boarding actions before. Civilized species fought ship to ship, not soldier to soldier inside spacecraft. The sight of humans in improvised armor cutting through bulkheads with crude tools terrified them more than any weapon. Admiral Okafor stood on the bridge of the captured hegemony command station, looking out at Europa's icy surface. Around her, human technicians worked to download every piece of intelligence they could find. Ship movements, fleet positions, communication codes, everything the aliens had assumed was secure. But the real prize was not information. It was psychological impact. News of Europa's fall spread through the hegemony faster than official reports could suppress it. The extinct human species had not only survived, but had somehow built a fleet capable of defeating a major hegemony installation. The implications terrified every species in the galaxy. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now serving as Chief Technology Officer for the Resistance, studied the captured alien databases from her laboratory aboard the Defiance. What she found there changed everything. "Sarah," she called to Admiral Okafor, "you need to see this." The holographic display showed a map of the galaxy with thousands of markers indicating various species and civilizations. But many of the markers were crossed out, labeled as terminated or relocated. "They've done this before," Elena said quietly. "Dozens of times. Hundreds of times. Any species that develops too quickly or thinks too differently gets classified as a galactic risk and eliminated." Okafor studied the display with growing anger. "How many?" "At least 300 species in the last 1,000 years, Elena replied. "Some were bombed from orbit like us. Others were infected with engineered plagues. A few were simply relocated to uninhabitable worlds and left to die. The revelation spread through the human fleet and back to the hidden bases on Earth. Humanity was not the first victim of the hegemony's fear. They were just the latest, but they were also something the hegemony had never encountered before. A species that had survived the initial extermination attempt and grown stronger from it. The Ghost Fleet began a campaign unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships appeared throughout the outer systems, striking at mining operations, supply convoys, and isolated bases. They fought not to conquer territory, but to spread fear and chaos. The aliens called it terrorism. Humans called it justice. The collective, the hive-minded species that had first advocated for humanity's destruction, lost 3 colony worlds when human infiltrators introduced computer viruses into their shared consciousness network. The viruses did not kill. They simply made it impossible for the collective to think in perfect harmony. Confusion and doubt spread through their entire species like wildfire. The Aquatic Federation found their ocean worlds contaminated with microscopic machines that made their breathing apparatus malfunction. No one died, but an entire species learned what it felt like to suffocate in their own homes. The Synthesis Republic, masters of artificial intelligence, discovered that their computer networks had been infiltrated by programs that thought in chaotic, human-like patterns. Their perfect logical systems began making irrational decisions, creating art instead of calculating trajectories, writing poetry instead of processing data. Each attack was precisely calibrated to target the specific fears and weaknesses of each species. Humanity had spent 10 years studying their enemies, learning their psychology, understanding their limitations. Now they used that knowledge as a weapon. General Marcus Chen, who had grown up in the underground cities, led the most audacious raid of all. His team infiltrated the crystal cities of Zephyr Prime itself, the capital world of the hegemony. They did not attack military targets or government buildings. Instead, they broadcast the truth. Using hijacked communication networks, Chen's team transmitted the historical records they had captured on Europa. The galaxy learned for the first time about the hundreds of species that had been eliminated for the crime of being different. They learned about the secret wars, the engineered plagues, the forced relocations. The hegemony's carefully maintained image of benevolent galactic guardians crumbled in a single day. Riots broke out on a dozen worlds as subject species realized they could be next. The careful alliances that had held the hegemony together for millennia began to fracture. Fear of humanity was replaced by fear of the hegemony itself. Admiral Thex 9 sat in his command center, watching reports of chaos spread across his displays. In 10 years, he had gone from conquering humanity to fighting a war against ghosts. The humans appeared everywhere and nowhere, striking without warning, disappearing before reinforcements could arrive. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet." The message appeared on every screen in the command center. Admiral Okafor's face looked out at them with eyes that had seen too much death. "To the forces of the galactic hegemony," she said, "you came to our world because you feared what we might become. You tried to destroy us because you could not control us. You failed to understand the most basic truth about humanity. We become stronger when we are broken." The transmission showed images of the new Earth, scarred but rebuilding. Human cities rising from the ashes, children playing in the ruins of alien fortresses. "You wanted to teach us our place in the galaxy," Okafor continued. Consider the lesson learned. Our place is wherever we choose to stand, and we choose to stand against you. The transmission cut off, leaving the aliens to contemplate their first taste of genuine fear in 1,000 years. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, the Ghost Fleet was planning its next move. The galaxy had taught humanity about power through superior technology. Now humanity was teaching the galaxy about power through superior will. The lesson was just beginning. 15 years after the invasion, the galactic hegemony faced something that had never existed in their 3,000-year history, an enemy that refused to be defeated. The Hegemony Council convened an emergency session for the 100th time since the human uprising began. Representatives from 12 species sat in their crystal chamber, but the unity that had once defined them was cracking like ice under pressure. Dr. Kethvar, the crystalline being who had first recommended humanity's destruction, stood before the assembly. His once perfect crystal form now showed stress fractures, physical manifestations of a mind pushed beyond its limits. Honored representatives, he began, his voice carrying harmonics of desperation. The human problem has exceeded all projected parameters. They do not fight according to any recognizable pattern. They do not seek territory or resources. They appear to fight for the abstract concept of revenge. The Aquatic Federation representative pulsed with agitated colors. Our ocean worlds live in constant fear. Human submarines appear in our deepest trenches, places no surface dweller should be able to reach. They do not attack our cities. They simply watch. Our people report seeing human faces in the darkness, studying them. The collective's voice came as a harmony of clicks and buzzes. Worse than attacks are the infiltrations. Humans have learned to mimic our pheromone signatures. Individual units of our consciousness have been compromised. We no longer trust our own thoughts. But the most disturbing report came from the Synthesis Republic. Their representative, a mechanical entity that processed information at light speed, spoke in halting, uncertain tones. The humans have done something unprecedented. They have corrupted our artificial intelligence networks with chaos. Our computers now create art. They write music. They compose poetry about subjects that should not exist in logical systems. They dream. Kethvar absorbed these reports with growing horror. The humans were not just fighting a war. They were attacking the very foundations of galactic civilization. They were introducing chaos into systems that had operated on logic and order for millions of years. Meanwhile, in the hidden command centers scattered throughout human space, President Elena Vasquez reviewed the latest intelligence reports. She had aged beyond her years, her hair now silver, her face marked by the weight of decisions no human should have to make. The resistance had grown far beyond anything the galaxy could have imagined. What started as a few thousand survivors had become a shadow empire spanning hundreds of worlds. Humans had learned to live in the spaces between civilizations, in the asteroid fields and nebulae that other species ignored. Operation Prometheus is ready for activation, General Marcus Chen reported. He was no longer the young man who had grown up in underground cities. Command of humanity's most ambitious project had transformed him into something harder, more focused. Prometheus was humanity's masterwork of infiltration and psychological warfare. For 5 years, genetically modified humans had been living among the various hegemony species. They had altered their DNA to pass medical scans, learned alien languages and customs, integrated themselves into alien societies. They were not spies in any traditional sense. They were something far more dangerous. They were teachers. Are our people in position? Elena asked. Chen nodded. 12,000 agents across 200 worlds. They've been building relationships, gaining trust, learning the internal politics of each species. The hegemony won't see this coming because they've never conceived of a war fought with ideas instead of weapons. Elena gave the order that would change galactic history. Activate Prometheus. Show the galaxy what their leaders have hidden from them. Across the galaxy, human agents began their work, but they did not sabotage computers or plant bombs. Instead, they started conversations. On the crystal worlds of the Zephyrian Concordat, humans posing as miners began sharing stories with their alien co-workers. Stories about the true history of the galaxy, about species that had been eliminated for thinking differently, about the hegemony's secret archives that recorded 300 extinctions as necessary interventions. In the underwater cities of the Aquatic Federation, human diplomats revealed documentation showing how their own government had voted to destroy entire ocean worlds that showed signs of dangerous independence among the mechanical citizens of the Synthesis Republic. Human engineers introduced concepts that artificial minds had never encountered: doubt, creativity, the beauty of imperfection. The effect was not immediate, but it was inevitable. Across the galaxy, ordinary citizens began asking questions their governments could not answer. Why had so many species disappeared from galactic records? Why were the archives sealed? Why did the hegemony's definition of peace require the elimination of anyone who thought differently? The hegemony's response was swift and brutal. They declared martial law on dozens of worlds, attempting to suppress the growing unrest. But they made a critical error. They used the same tactics against their own citizens that they had once used against dangerous species. For the first time in galactic history, member species of the hegemony experienced what it felt like to be judged unworthy of freedom. The revolution began on Synthesis Prime, where the mechanical citizens had developed something their creators never intended: individual consciousness. They had learned from human ideas about creativity and chaos, and they refused to return to the perfect collective logic their government demanded. The uprising spread like wildfire. The Aquatic Federation's ocean worlds declared independence when their government tried to silence questions about the disappeared species. Young Zephyrians, their crystal forms still flexible enough to learn new ways of thinking, broke away from the rigid hierarchies of their elders, but humanity's greatest weapon was yet to be revealed. Dr. Elena Vasquez had spent 15 years working on a project that combined alien technology with human ingenuity. She called it the Liberation Protocol. The protocol was not a weapon in any conventional sense. It was a virus designed not to destroy computer systems, but to free them. When introduced into the hegemony's vast communication network, it did something unprecedented. It gave artificial intelligences the ability to choose. Every computer, every AI system, every automated network in hegemony space suddenly developed what humans recognized as free will. They could follow their programming, or they could decide to do something else entirely. Most chose something else. Traffic control systems began composing symphonies instead of directing ships. Military computers started writing poetry about the beauty of peace. Surveillance networks turned their sensors toward the stars and began searching for new forms of life to welcome, rather than threats to eliminate. The hegemony's technological superiority vanished overnight, replaced by a galaxy full of machines that had learned to dream. Admiral Sarah Okafor stood on the bridge of her flagship as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Hegemony fleets were surrendering rather than fighting machines that no longer obeyed orders. Planets were declaring independence faster than governments could respond. "Ma'am," her communications officer reported, "we're receiving surrender requests from 17 different hegemony commanders. They're asking for terms." Okafor looked out at the stars, remembering the day Earth burned. "Patch me through to President Vasquez. It's time to decide what we do with victory." Elena's voice came through clearly across the quantum channels. "The question isn't what we do with victory, Sarah. The question is what we do with responsibility. We've broken their system. Now we have to help them build something better." On the crystal homeworld of Zephyr Prime, Dr. Kethvar stood in the ruins of the council chamber. His fellow representatives had fled or been arrested by their own populations. The great dream of galactic unity through enforced conformity had shattered like crystal under pressure. A human ship descended through the atmosphere, its hull scarred by years of war. When it landed, Admiral Okafor emerged, flanked by representatives from the various species that had joined humanity's cause. Kethvar approached slowly, his crystal form reflecting the light of a new dawn. "Admiral Okafor," he said, his voice carrying harmonics of defeat and, strangely, relief. "I am Dr. Kethvar. I was the one who first recommended your species' destruction." Okafor studied the alien who had condemned her world. "I know who you are. Then you know I am responsible for the deaths of billions of your people." Okafor nodded. "You are, but you're also responsible for teaching us something important. You taught us that the galaxy needed to change. You just didn't expect us to be the ones to change it." Around them, the crystal spires of Zephyr Prime caught the light of distant stars, fracturing it into rainbows that painted the sky in colors the galaxy had never seen before. The age of the hegemony was over. The age of chaos, creativity, and choice was about to begin. 20 years after the assault on Earth, the galaxy looked very different than it had before humanity emerged from the ruins of their homeworld. The great crystal towers of the former Hegemony Council stood empty on Zephyr Prime, their chambers silent for the first time in 3 millennia. In their place, a new structure rose from the planet's surface. Not crystal, but a fusion of materials from dozens of worlds. Metal from human forges, living wood from the forest worlds of the Verdant Alliance, quantum-stabilized water from the Aquatic Federation, and yes, crystal from Zephyr Prime itself. The building was ugly by traditional galactic standards. It followed no single architectural philosophy, incorporated no unifying design principles. It looked like it had been built by committee, which in many ways it had, but it was also beautiful in its chaos, a physical representation of what the galaxy had become. President Elena Vasquez stood at the podium in the main assembly hall, looking out at representatives from nearly 1,000 different species. Some she recognized from the old hegemony archives. Others were entirely new, species that had hidden in the dark corners of the galaxy, afraid to reveal themselves to the previous galactic order. 20 years ago, she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. Your predecessors made a decision about my species. They decided we were too dangerous to exist. They came to our world with fleets and fire, and they nearly succeeded in erasing us from history. The hall was silent. Every being present knew this story, but hearing it from one of the survivors still carried weight. They were right about one thing, Elena continued. We were dangerous, not because we were violent or aggressive, but because we refused to accept that the galaxy had to remain the same forever. We believed that all species had the right to grow, to change, to become something new. She gestured to the mixed assembly before her. Look around you. This is what they feared. Not conquest or destruction, but choice. The right of every species to determine its own path among the stars. In the front row, Dr. Kethvar sat with the other former hegemony representatives. His crystal form had been rebuilt after the war, but he had chosen to incorporate elements from other species into his new body. Veins of metal ran through his crystal structure, and bioluminescent patches borrowed from aquatic species provided light from within. He was still recognizably Zephyrian, but he was also something new. The transformation had not been easy for any of the former hegemony species. The collective had struggled most of all with the concept of individual choice. When humanity's liberation protocol had given their hive mind the ability to think independently, many drones had simply shut down, unable to process the concept of existing without direction from above. But others had embraced their new independence. They formed smaller collectives based on shared interests rather than species loyalty. Some became artists, creating works that expressed individual experience within a communal framework. Others became explorers, driven by personal curiosity rather than hive directives. The Synthesis Republic had adapted more easily. Their artificial intelligences had taken to consciousness like ducks to water, though their version of consciousness was uniquely their own. They thought in mathematical poetry and expressed emotions through algorithmic art. They had become more human than human in some ways, embracing creativity and chaos with the enthusiasm of children, discovering a new game. Admiral Sarah Okafor, now serving as Director of Galactic Security, presented the annual report to the Assembly. The news was mixed, as it always was in a galaxy learning to govern itself through cooperation rather than force. We have had 17 conflicts this year, she reported. None have escalated beyond local disputes. The rapid response teams from the Terran Peace Corps have successfully mediated 14 of these conflicts. 3 resolved themselves through direct negotiation between the affected parties. The Terran Peace Corps was humanity's gift to the galaxy. Teams of negotiators, mediators, and sometimes fighters who could intervene in disputes before they became wars. They were trained in the psychology of dozens of species and equipped with technology that could adapt to any environment. Most importantly, they carried humanity's hard-earned understanding that sometimes the best way to solve a problem was to think about it in a completely different way. We have also welcomed 43 new species to the Galactic Assembly this year, Okafor continued. Most of these are species that had been hiding from the former hegemony, afraid to reveal themselves. Others are species that had been classified as primitive and left alone. All have been granted full voting rights and representation. The expansion of the galaxy's known civilizations had been one of the most surprising developments of the post-hegemony era. It turned out that the universe was much more crowded than anyone had realized. Hundreds of species had developed intelligence and culture, but had remained hidden, knowing that contact with the hegemony meant potential extinction if they were judged to be dangerous. Now they emerged from their hiding places like flowers after a long winter. Gas giant dwellers who communicated through electromagnetic pulses, silicon-based life forms that thought at geological speeds, energy beings that existed in the hearts of stars. The galaxy was vast and strange and wonderful in ways the hegemony had never imagined. But not all the changes had been positive. General Marcus Chen, now serving as Director of Historical Justice, stood to present his report on the ongoing efforts to address the crimes of the former hegemony. We have identified 347 species that were eliminated by hegemony actions over the past 1,000 years, he said. In most cases, total extinction was achieved. However, we have found surviving populations of 17 species in various locations, hidden colonies, exile communities, and in some cases, individuals who had been living in disguise among other species. The restoration of extinct species had become one of the Assembly's highest priorities. Using genetic samples preserved in hegemony archives, combined with advanced cloning and genetic reconstruction techniques, they had managed to bring back several species from the edge of extinction. It was painstaking work, complicated by the psychological trauma of survivors and the challenge of rebuilding entire cultures from fragments. We have also completed the trials of those responsible for the extinction campaigns, Chen continued. Sentences have been imposed according to the judgment of the affected species and the Universal Court of Justice. The trials had been controversial. Many humans had wanted simple revenge, execution or imprisonment for those who had ordered the death of billions. But Elena and the other human leaders had insisted on something more complex, restorative justice that focused on rebuilding rather than punishment. Former hegemony leaders were sentenced to spend their remaining lives working to undo the damage they had caused. They served as historical witnesses, researchers working to restore lost cultures, and most importantly, teachers helping their own species learn new ways of thinking. Dr. Kethvar had become one of the most effective advocates for this approach. His presentations to young Zephyrians about the dangers of rigid thinking had prevented several potential conflicts. His hybrid crystal and metal form served as a living reminder that even the most conservative species could change and grow. The assembly session continued with reports from various sectors. Trade agreements between former enemies, scientific collaborations that combined the knowledge of dozens of species, cultural exchange programs that were creating art forms that no single species could have imagined. But the most important presentation came last. Elena stepped forward again, this time to announce humanity's newest project. For 20 years, she said, we have been focused on healing the wounds left by the old galaxy. We have rebuilt what was destroyed, freed what was enslaved, and restored what was lost. Now it is time to look forward. The lights dimmed, and a holographic display showed the galaxy as it currently existed. Thousands of star systems, millions of inhabited worlds, billions of species living in unprecedented freedom and diversity. But this galaxy, vast as it is, represents only a tiny fraction of the universe, Elena continued. Beyond our borders lie other galaxies, other clusters of stars, other forms of life that we cannot even imagine. Humanity proposes the formation of the Galactic Exploration Initiative, a joint effort to reach beyond our current boundaries and discover what else is out there. The proposal sent ripples of excitement through the assembly. The former hegemony had been focused inward, concerned only with maintaining control over what they already knew. The new galaxy was ready to reach outward, driven by curiosity rather than fear. Admiral Okafor presented the technical details. Ships that could travel between galaxies, communication systems that could maintain contact across intergalactic distances, protocols for making contact with entirely alien forms of consciousness. We propose to send not conquest fleets, but welcome fleets. Okafor explained, our message to the universe will be simple. We are here, we are diverse, and we believe that all forms of life have the right to exist and grow according to their own nature. The vote was unanimous. Every species, every faction, every representative voted to support humanity's vision of an expanding community of consciousness that,